Hi, this is Shayna from YumiYarns.com, and we are back with lesson 3 of our Homegoing Socks. So we've already covered knitting the toe and the cast on, and then yesterday we covered knitting the foot and discussed cables and how to read them and how to decipher cable abbreviations and everything. And now today we are on to the heel. So if you're not quite at the heel, you're fine. You can watch and knit your heel when you're ready, or pause the videos and come back when you're ready to knit your own heel in your socks. So I've got the foot and the toe done in my little sample here that I'm making, and I'm all ready to move on to the foot, or excuse me, onto the heel. We ended after working a row 5 in our cabling chart, which means we just did a cable. And we end there so that we're ready to move on to the trees later on. But we're going to start off our pattern. Oh, by the way, sorry, if you haven't gotten a pattern, right down in the description box, there's a link. You can get the pattern. If you get it during this first week while we've got the pattern release and the tutorials going, you can get it for 50% off by joining my newsletter. Also, thank you again to Merino y Vino for sending us this beautiful yarn to knit the sample socks and to teach the classes with. This is part of her yarn surprise box. It's a quarterly box that she releases. And it's always a surprise what colorway she does, but she does book recommendations and little goodies and everything to go along with the knitting kit. So it's a lot of fun. It's a really good value for the price, and I've got that linked below also for you guys. And what we're going to do next, if you've got your pattern handy, it'll tell you to knit to the marker, which since I don't actually have markers going, I just have this bit of yarn, which was my tail, sticking out to let me know which side is my beginning of round. So I know this is where my round starts, and since I'm on double pointed needles and there are 4 of them, I have 2 at the back and 2 at the front. So my marker, which if you're following the pattern and put a marker in, it's going to be halfway across. So right here is where my marker would be. So that means we're just going to knit across the top of the foot, and then we'll be back here and ready to work our heel. So I'm going to untangle myself from twisting the yarn around, and I'm going to quick knit across these stitches. No, I am not. Sorry, we're going to knit in pattern across the stitches. If you just straight knit across, that would be a problem. So, go. And all knit in pattern means is, since we finished on a round 5 of the previous stitch pattern, just work whatever round 1 is, since the 5 round repeat. It's just like the first round we did yesterday. A bunch of purls and a little bit of knits where the cable is, and a bunch more purls. right, so we are ready to work our heel. So since it's a short row heel, that means we are only going to work across the back half here, and we're not going to knit all the way across every single time. We're going to knit shorter than a full row or round, but we'll be working back and forth for this section, not all the way around. So that's why it's called short rows, because you're only knitting a short row. So what we'll do is, in our pattern, it tells us to knit X amount of stitches and then work a German short row, and then purl X amount of stitches, work a German short row, and then you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and each time you'll be bringing the amount of stitches that you work shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's what creates this little line here. Because if you look, this is where we're knitting right now. We'll just be knitting up here. And since we're working the rows shorter and shorter and shorter, that's what makes this diagonal line here. Because then once we reach our halfway point here where we turn the heel, we'll actually start picking up those rows, and that's where the turn happens, and you end up working short rows to pick up the little wrap bits that we're doing as part of the German short rows. And that's how you connect this section of fabric to this section of fabric right along here as you go. And then by the time we've gotten to where we're working all the stitches across the needles, we will be up here and done with our heel and ready to move on to the leg. So let's get started. So we're going to knit, for the size I'm doing, 31 stitches, but that's actually going to bring us one stitch away from the beginning of round. Okay, so we're at our last stitch. So to work a German short row, we're going to knit that stitch just like normal, slip it back to the left needle, and then bring the yarn over top and through between the needles so that it's still on the wrong side of the fabric, and your stitch kind of pulls itself over and looks like it turns into two stitches, but it's actually just being a single stitch that's being pulled over enough. And now we're going to turn our work and I'm going to do that so that that crazy needle gets out of our face. And now we are ready to purl across. So we're going to purl across. Remember, I've got 4 needles, so we're going to purl across the rest of this needle, and we're going to purl across the next needle all the way to the last stitch. And then we're going to pause for a minute and work a German short row on that one. right, so there's our first needle done. Purl across this one. There we go. It's always a little more awkward with the camera and everything going. So I apologize that it kind of looks like semi-managed chaos sometimes. And to be honest, this is actually pretty awkward. Typically I knit backwards for my return rows. So after this one, maybe I'll show you that. Now, if you want to practice backwards knitting, you can, because it's very handy for working short row heels and short rows in general. Alright, so we're at our last stitch, and similar to what we did before, we're going to purl our stitch. We're going to slide it back to the left needle without splitting the yarn. Oh, and I still managed to split it. Go. And then again, we'll bring the yarn forward. We don't need to go between the needles for actually knitting, but for right now I'm going to, just to pull that over enough so that you can see that it looks like the other one. I'm going to bring it back behind because we want the yarn on the wrong side, because we'll be knitting. I just wanted to make sure it was nice and tight so you could see that this side is exactly the same as what we did on the other side for the short row, where we pulled the stitch to the back enough that it looks like 2 stitches now, but it's actually just 1 stitch wrapped really tight over the needle, weirdly. And then next, we're actually just going to knit straight back across up to the last stitch before our German short row. And I think I'm going to go down a needle here, just so that it's one less thing right in the middle. Since we're not doing any patterning or anything here, we're just knitting and purling. It might make it easier if I'm going to show you the knitting backwards technique too. Almost there. Remember, that last stitch will look like 2 stitches. So this is our last stitch. This is our second to the last stitch. And we're going to work the German short row the exact same way with this one, where we knit it, slide it over to the left needle, and then pull the yarn over top of the needle, down and back through between the needles so that the yarn's back on that side and our stitch looks like 2 stitches. And now to do where you knit backwards instead of purl, oops, keep your needles in your hands just like this. Insert your left needle into the stitch on your right needle. Oops. Wrap your yarn over top to the right, and then bring your needle through and slide the stitch off your right needle. So we just purled, essentially. which is basically knitting backwards. It's a lot more handy when you're working these short rows. So I'll go slowly again. Left needle goes in the stitch on the right needle. Wrap the yarn over the top to the right. Bring the stitch through and off your right needle. It does take a little bit of practice at first, but once you get this down, it's really slick and super handy. It's also great if you've ever tried or wanted to try entrelock. Oops. You do have to be careful because if you grab like the stitch below or something like I just did, it can cause a mess. Nothing too terrible, but you still definitely want to try to avoid that if possible. Almost. Oops. Make sure your yarn stays in back and you don't split your yarn. I promise this yarn really is not very splitty. It's just a bit more awkward trying to knit and film. Sometimes the needles go where I don't necessarily want them to be. And I think I do tend to knit tighter while I'm filming than I typically do. So I think that contributes to the splitting. Okay, and now remember our German short row stitch that we did looks like 2 stitches. So this is the German short row, this is a regular stitch, this is a regular stitch. And if you're ever confused, look at the fabric beneath. You'll see this single stitch has a single row of V's underneath, as does this one, whereas this one, you have something weird going on at the top of this V. It's like an elongated V almost. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so to work this one, backwards knitting, do your backwards knit stitch, just like normal, but going to take the yarn and bring it to the front before we slide the stitch back to the right needle. And now we can bring the yarn to the back over top of the needle and see it pulled our stitch over, just like this one. So now we've got our German short row here, and we can just go back to knitting across to the set of German short rows on the other side. And you just keep doing that, where you keep working up towards the German short row that you did on the row before and working a new one on that stitch right before your German short row stitch. So each row you're essentially taking out 1 stitch. And your pattern will tell you how many stitches to leave unworked in the middle, because that is how you get this nice curve and it's not pointed. Because if we worked all the stitches as German short rows, this little diagonal here would go all the way down and you'd have a really pointy heel. So that being said, if you have more narrow heels, you can keep the amount of stitches left unworked smaller. If you have wider heels, you can actually stop working the amount of stitches a little bit early, so that it's a little bit wider. Just be careful though, because since you're creating a right angle here, if your pattern, like for the one that I'm working, for the size I'm making, I'm supposed to leave 8 stitches unworked in the middle here. say you decide, oh, I have really wide heels and I want this to be really comfortable, so I'm going to leave 16 stitches unworked in the middle. Well, that's fine, but your heel is going to be a lot shorter because instead of stopping here with your German short rows, you're stopping like here. So your heel is actually going to lose some depth, so it won't be as tall, so it might only be that big. So you lose half an inch or so. And that's just kind of giving you an example. That's not an exact anything, but do, kind of play around with it. You're not going to ruin it. You can always take it out. The heels don't take that long to make, but it is worth kind of checking to see what sort of fit you want. Since everybody has different shaped feet and you are making these socks to fit you, that is an option there. So I will let you guys have fun working this first half of the heel. I'm going to finish up here with this half, and I will come back once I've got this done, and we will go about the next half of the heel in the next part of the video. So I'll see you in just a little bit here. All right, so we are back. I've got the first half of the heel done. See how it kind of, aside from these little ones that we left unknit, it kind of makes a triangle. That is what you want, because if we take this heel and lay it flat, it's kind of a rounded triangle shape that you end up with anyways for a heel, because that's what we just knit. See? There. Now we're going to turn right here. That's our unknit stitches. And if you look, remember that diagonal? Got on both sides. And then it'll go up into the leg. So this is the part we're going to knit next. This is our second half of our heel. And to do that, we have to work those German short rows that we made. So I am going to continue knitting backwards. Maybe I'll do a row of purling, but it's real awkward with the camera. So we ended after working, after working a German short row after a purl row, so we're back on the right side. Again, my size that I'm making, I left 8 stitches unworked in the middle. All right, so there's my unworked or short rowed stitches. I don't know what to call them, but the ones that do not have German short rows, they're just standard. Those ones are right in the middle. We knit across those. Here's our first German short row. Remember, we've got our row of V's here, and then it splits up there. So we know that's where our first one is. So we got to that, and all we're going to do is knit both of those together like they're one stitch. Oops. Make sure you actually are knitting them though, and not the stitch below. There we go. Go. And then to knit it backwards, just going to slide that back to the left needle. Insert our left needle to the stitch on the right, wrap the yarn over the top to the right, pull it through and off. We're going to do that all the way across. we get to our next German short row, which again, we've got a row of V's and it's split weird, so there it is. And you do the exact same thing, but we're gonna purl it. So you put the needle through and work those two legs like they're one stitch, slide it off, and slip that stitch over, and knit back to the other side. And you'll notice there's a little bit of a gap. That's okay. You kind of want that. That's to let you know you made it to where the German short row is. So we knit that, and then knit this guy, just like we did before, with the two legs together. There's that. And I will show you a purl row quick here, just because I know it's not fair to only show you the knitting backwards if you're not knitting backwards. So we slip that first stitch, and I'm just going to purl all the way across. Right, and again we have that nice gap there to let us know we're coming up to our German short row. There it is, where it looks like a double stitch kind of clumped together. We're just going to purl that stitch, purl both legs of it, pretend it's all just one, because it is. It's just wrapped weird around the needle. So we purled it, and now we'll turn our work, keeping the yarn to the back. Slip that first stitch again, and knit across. And we're going to keep just doing that same thing over and over, because see, got a little bit of a start to the shaping there where it turned. So we're just going to keep doing that, where we just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth till we have worked all of our German short rows. And then we will be all set to start our leg setup, which our leg setup is going to involve moving our beginning of round. So enjoy this part, and then the legs get interesting with all the cables and twists and everything that makes up the Tree of Life pattern, which is also called the Twin Trees pattern, which is our fun design that goes up the leg of these socks. And it's very, very fun. I actually love this stitch pattern. This is one of the very first cable stitch patterns I did as a knitter. It was part of a blanket that I did, and I loved every moment of it. I thought it was just so cool and ingenious, and these little twisted stitches are still like one of my favorite things ever. So I'm very excited to get to that lesson tomorrow. We're going to cover so many fun things. So go ahead and finish up your heels. We'll meet back here tomorrow for the next lesson. I hope you're enjoying knitting your socks and that you're having a wonderful week so far. Again, if you haven't gotten the pattern yet, it's in the link down below. And I hope you have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Oh, and if you're enjoying these, please subscribe. It really helps out my channel. And if you would like to be notified when the next tutorial comes up, just click the little notification bell so that you can be notified by YouTube when I post a new video. All right, thanks guys. We'll see you tomorrow.